He appeared on The Independent, another Notre Dame podcast last week. It sounded like he was now back in the Chicago South Bend corridor and attempting to maybe make himself sort of like a dean of the program type of guy. Like, no hard feelings.
Please do not besmirch my CBS colleague, Brent.
I'm not besmirching him. There's no besmirchment.
I'll besmirch him for both of you.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Richard Johnson. I'm Alex Kirshner. Split Zone Duo preview season rolls along for 2026. In just a moment, we're going to introduce a special guest who's going to kick us off as we do the FBS Independents. Can you guess how many FBS Independents there are now, Richard? The ranks are thinning.
We are down to 2. We're technically down to 1. UConn is a true independent, as is the position of Split Zone Duo LLC. Notre Dame is not a real independent due to the fact that they have 7 or 8 games that are locked in each and every year, 5 of which due to a scheduling arrangement with the ACC. So they, like many of the rest of the teams in Power 4, have 3 or 4 per year rotating non-conference games because, as previously stated, they are not a true independent. So the answer to your question really is 1. Congrats, UConn. You stand alone.
This is your worst bit. Like the worst bit your entire show does.
It's not a bit.
I think the truth. If you're still saying that after last year's debacle, Richard, I have questions for you.
I'm gonna take my ball and go home and not play in the postseason of this podcast.
Oh, podcast is canceled. Oh wait, no, they're still doing it, just not with Notre Dame.
That's right. And Jessica Smetana, our Notre Dameologist, joins. I want to be clear that this is not a bit that our podcast does. This is a bit that Richard does.
It's not a bit, just to be clear.
Yeah. We are going to talk about the 2 FBS independent programs, and then we are going to talk about a newly reconstituted Pac-12. Jessica Smetana, our old friend from our SB Nation days and current friend from around the internet and her many guest spots on the show, you are kind enough to join us, despite Richard talking badly about you the way that he just did. Thank you for your graciousness for being with us anyway.
It's fine. And the Pac-12 this year, a fun bit would be asking each other to name the teams in them. Although I assume you've already put together your notes for the episode. But
let me tell you, it's going to be till about week 5 before I get it done. I get it down. I could tell you that right now.
I obviously do have them written down in front of me, but the tough thing about the Pac-12 and naming the teams in it is specifically all of the blank states they put together. That is a unique nomenclature thing that the Pac-12 has going right now, which lends itself to tongue twisters and things when you're trying to recite the teams. But it is an 8-team football league, a 9-team league in total. There's Gonzaga as well, but we won't be talking about them later.
Right. It's blank state on the West Coast, but not all of them. That's the confusing part.
Does Gonzaga at least have like a club football team or something? A flag football team or something? They got it, right?
I mean, they must have a quad.
Like somebody.
Intramural.
We're playing intramurals, brother. We're playing intramurals.
I don't believe they currently have anything even at the club level. They did play football for a pretty long time, and then the little World War II thing happened, and they did not continue after that time.
Never heard of it.
No.
Also a bad bit.
Gonzaga.
World War II is a terrible bit.
Were they? Yeah. Were they?
And then this guy in Germany just kept going. He just really committed to it, and we had a lot of problems as a result. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess the Gonzaga football wasn't even actually that good. It doesn't look like it. No, doesn't look like it.
No, they had a 134-99-20 all-time record.
Right. Yeah, but I'm looking at these seasons, and brother, it's a lot of. Sorry, I am overlooking the 3-0 1917 Gonzaga team under Jimmy
Spanish
Condon.
Flu.
Yeah, I know. That is a good point, Jess. Everybody else is injured with the Spanish flu. Not many people are over 500 except for the great man Clipper Smith, a 7-2-2 Gonzaga team in 1925, 6-2-1 in 1928. So some scant Gonzaga Bulldogs football history.
Fun off-season project going through all the big schools that no longer have football. For instance, my fiance is a Boston University Terrier.
Oh, really?
They ended their football program in the 80s, which is partially why we are engaged to be married. Because if he were a college football fan of another school, I don't know if I could do that. with another person would be toxic to be around.
Alex
me.
is obviously familiar with Sewanee, the Fighting Tigers.
Yeah. Have you ever been to a wedding where it's an Ohio State groom and a Michigan bride, for example? Because they tend to mention it quite a lot at these weddings.
Yeah, it's a thing. Definitely a thing.
Yeah. Like they tend to mention it a lot. I've seen a couple of these, and in at least one of the cases, the couple met at a tailgate for the game. And so I understand it's part of your love story, but there's a lot of mentioning of Ohio State and Michigan in the ceremony. There's quite a lot, and a lot in the reception. And it's like, I think 1 to 3 is a reasonable amount to mention that if you are wedding and you are from opposite fan bases. But I think once we get into the 10 range, it's sort of like, what else do we have going on?
But it's like
is kind of
very good pre-wedding prop bet to do with your friends. That's what I found when I've been to weddings of that nature.
That's a good point.
I'm sure we have many listeners who have hopefully won a few bucks or won a few drinks off of that kind of prop bet. Jess, let's talk about Notre Dame as we start with the FBS independents here. I recently had the pleasure of talking a bit with you about this team on Rakes Report with Chris Wilson. I had a lot of fun doing that show. And the thorn that I brought to that show, as we play a rosebud thorn format, is I said the wide receiver curse somehow still does remain on this program because Malachi Fields came to Notre Dame last year and his numbers declined. This is now 7 years in a row, roughly, of me wondering about this on the Notre Dame preview. You made a case to me that you think the Notre Dame pass catching situation is actually improving this year.
I thought it definitely improved last year, but I think that because the offense had Janarian Price and Jeremiah Love on it, the passing numbers in general were not prolific, but they were highly efficient. And I think Malachi Fields was a really, really good pass catcher for the Irish. And I think Jordan Faison, who is returning, was a dual sport lacrosse player and now is solely focused on football, led the team in receptions and receiving yards last year. And I think he's pretty underrated. He's a very quick, shifty guy. He can get you a first down. He can really take contact well. And he's the player that I think CJ Carr kind of turns to in those situations where you need to convert a third down into a first down. But I would say last year was a big step forward. And in the portal this year, Notre Dame got Mylan Graham and Quincy Porter from Ohio State. They also have a number of, as we discussed, Alex, NFL legacies on the team. Devin Fitzgerald, Jerome Bettis Jr. There's so many. And while I think that the situation is, you can't do like wide receiver by committee or, running back by committee and not have someone who is going to really be like a number one guy and win a national championship, I think, and maybe I'm wrong. I do think there's a few players who that could be. And so the question is kind of like, who is that? Like, we haven't seen Porter or Graham play a game yet for Notre Dame. Jaden Greathouse, who was really good in the playoff 2 years ago, missed most of last season with a hamstring injury. So is he going to be healthy this season? So there's a ton of possibilities, but, and I would just say a ton of talent. It's just that we need to see it happen on the field before I can say like, yeah, this is going to be a prolific wide receiver room.
College football, I think, overall treats Ohio State wide receivers as like the problematic X. Like, I can fix him. Count the number of schools that do this. NC State did this with Noah Rogers a couple years ago. Hell, Alabama did it with Jameson Williams a few years ago, but back before that. But jettisoned Ohio State wide receiver who couldn't find a way to crack through is just such a fun archetype. And Notre Dame is trying it. And hopefully they'll find one out of these two that can really play and really give them what they need. I love what Notre Dame has up front. I don't really think that's that's much of a surprise to the folks. They bring back 2 or 3 of the offensive linemen that you've known through this few-year run of really great Notre Dame play, and even the national championship run. So they will be solid up front. You expect that. Aeneas Williams absolutely can play. Where are we at on CJ Carr, Jess? The unknown man, so to speak.
I think CJ Carr had a really great season last year that was sort of overshadowed by everything that happened when the season ended. I think there's certainly room for improvement, but what he showed was that he's really smart at reading defenses. He has a really nice arm, good accuracy, good decision making. And like I said, the passing numbers last year were not prolific, but they were very efficient. And part of that is because they had these two game breaking running backs who neither one of them wanted to leave, but both ended up getting drafted in the first round in the NFL draft this past spring. So I think there's certainly room for CJ Carr to take a step up this season and be one of the best quarterbacks in college football. But part of what he needs to do is be able to execute in high pressure games and, not press too much in those types of situations. But I really have a lot of confidence that he can do those things. He's just getting such rave reviews from the staff and from, the Todd McShays of the world and the Manning Passing Academy people of the world on what he's been able to show so far.
I don't have a number on this, and I'm a stat on this. You might, Jess, but I think the most intriguing thing about how Notre Dame last year was built was the explosives. And again, this is anecdotal, so I apologize. The explosives all felt like they came from the running game. And that's not a problem necessarily if you're getting the explosives. Find a way to get the explosives any way you can. But now that those two guys aren't here, where do the explosives come from for Notre Dame? And that, I think, is the only thing I need to see from Notre Dame. Notre Dame will be playing in January. We all know that is the truth. As the college football playoff rules stipulate, if Notre Dame is top 12 ranked, they automatically get in. Or is it top 11 or top 12? They automatically get in. That's the way the playoff works these days. So yes, we know that they will be playing in January. And what I'm bringing up, frankly, is a January problem.
No is a strong word. I would expect.
Yeah,
I would say a really strong word.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Richard. I think that
wait, Jess is agreeing with me or Alex?
I agree with Alex because I think one thorn, I guess, I have for this team is that if there is an injury to CJ Carr, even if he's out for like 2 weeks, I think that the quarterback depth is really, really inexperienced. And it's not like last season where Notre Dame had Kenny Minchie on the bench, or like the year before when they have Steve Angeli on the bench and he has to come in for a series against Penn State and get them into field goal range. Like this year, that is something that I'm concerned about. And, you have to be a little lucky with injuries, but also I think Notre Dame's schedule is such that if they do lose 2 games, which I said same as last year, I don't think they're going to get the benefit of the doubt and get into the playoffs. So even though the schedule is not that hard, they play BYU on the road, Miami at home, and SMU at home. Those are
they can lose to BYU.
Well, okay, but
that's 3 games, Richard, that are not walks.
They'll be favorites in the BYU game on the road, but you still could lose, and then your margin for error is that you have to 100%. Win the rest of your games, I think. Or be in a situation where like last year I think was a little unlucky because of what happened in the rest of the college football field the last month of the season. Like if Alabama loses an extra game down the stretch to Auburn or something, or Oklahoma loses, then I think Notre Dame kind of comfortably gets into the playoff last year.
Yes.
So I think that certainly depends, but I wouldn't say that I'm gonna stake my mortgage on Notre Dame getting in no matter what. There's a lot of stuff that can happen in the course of a season.
Okay. All right. Not as confident as I thought. I'm
confident it is a very good football team, but I think that it's college football and any stupid thing can happen.
Of course. Just so we're clear though. No, I just looked it up. Yeah. Notre Dame's win total is 10.5.
Yeah.
10.5. Excuse me. I'm sorry. That was last year's. Hold on. Let me make sure.
I think it's 11.5.
It is. Yeah.
It's one of the higher ones.
Thank you. It's 11.5. I think it's interesting that I'm more confident on Notre Dame than Jess is. Who is scoring on this team outside of Miami? They'll get that BYU game will be a rock fight.
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think that is my rose is the defense is going to be so good. I think one of the biggest weaknesses last year on defense was the pass rush just not being as prolific, with Boubacar Traore coming off of an ACL injury and Bryce Young kind of getting his first starts as a sophomore last year. But they added a lot of depth on the defensive line, a lot of size on the defensive line. This was a really good rushing defense last year, which they didn't get a lot of credit for because the coverage was also so good with the secondary. And that secondary is coming back with Leonard Moore and Christian Gray. They picked up DJ McKinney in the portal. The safeties are coming back that were the 2 best safeties last year for Notre Dame. The 3rd best safety also coming back for Notre Dame. Another rising safety in Ethan Long could get some playing time. He's also really good. Looks like another Kyle Hamilton type. So yes, I think that is, Richard, you're absolutely right. And that's where I am the most confident, is who's going to score on this team, because last year the Texas A&M game was by far the worst defensive performance. And if you look at the numbers, Marcel Reed did not have a good game, but there were a couple blown coverages, and that was the difference in a 1-point loss. And I think a lot of the blame goes on Notre Dame bringing in Chris Ash and him not having a grasp for what the defense was good at early on in those 2 games. By the time they fixed it, it was too late because there was no Texas A&M or Miami like team on the second half of the schedule for them to beat and prove that they belonged in the playoff. But I'm really excited to watch this defense. I think that they're going to be really good.
Chris Ash still there, by the way,
yes,
but
he is
in hopefully a better spot now. Just 2 things quickly.
Yeah.
Number 1, where are you on what constitutes a successful season? I've heard Notre Dame being bandied about as win the whole thing or bust.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you're that far, or if you would accept, something less than that.
Okay, I don't want to try to give you like a pedantic answer, but when people say like championship or bust, do they mean like something will happen if they don't make it? Because someone gets fired or like
it's podcast fodder. Exactly. It's just podcast fodder.
I think there are 2 teams in college football this year that are legitimately championship or bust. I think it's Texas and Oregon. And by championship or bust, I kind of really mean semifinal or maybe national championship game.
Yeah.
Just because with 3 or 4 elimination games, stuff happens. We know how that works. So I think when it was a 4-team playoff, championship or bust was a achievable thing. I don't know if championship or bust is really an achievable thing with a 3 or 4 team postseason for us.
Yeah.
But in any event, I think Notre Dame, to me, is clearly playoff or bust. And obviously I'm more bullish than you guys on this team making
I think
frankly waltzing into the playoff backwards.
Wait, hold on. You said playing in January, which means they win a 1st-round playoff game. That's where I took umbrage. That because then you're getting in the playoff and winning a game. But anyways, I digress. I would say no, because to me, championship or bust means like you've put all your eggs in this basket, like you spent a ton of money on it, you have high hopes on it, and next season you won't have the same expectations because you put too much into this season, and so there's going to be like a downfall. And I think where Notre Dame fans feel that way, Alex, is because of CJ Carr, because he's coming back and they think that if he's really good, he will be gone next year. Where I don't feel that way is that A, I don't think that that's guaranteed, but B, the recruiting that Marcus Freeman and this program have done over the last like two plus cycles has been really, really good. And I think that there's just no reason to believe that next year's roster isn't going to also be a championship caliber roster with whoever's at quarterback, whether it's one of the young up and comers, like I mentioned, or someone that they get in the portal, or CJ Carr coming back like Dante Moore did this year, even though he had some NFL draft potential. So that's where I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't think that this is like the end of the road if Notre Dame doesn't win a championship. I do think the expectation is you have to make the playoffs. You can't not make the playoffs with this team and the schedule. And semifinal, I think, would be probably where the expectation would be.
Yeah. I agree with Richard that championship or bust means semifinals or bust if we're all being adults about it. With anything, I agree with that.
Right.
The other thing to note about Notre Dame, and I think this is an impressive thing about Notre Dame does not really portal. And I know some of that, and Jess, you may know better than me, I know some of that probably has to do with some academic stuff, but overall, Notre Dame does not really portal at all. I think they took 8 guys in the transfer portal last year. They are one of those teams that says we're going to be, I mean, they have the luxury of doing this because they're goddamn Notre Dame, but we are going to be a relative developmental program, and we are going to trust what we have on our roster. Again, it's a thing that I say a lot, and we talk about it in this dichotomy with Georgia and Clemson. You can do this. You have the option to do this. And again, I know Notre Dame has some academic stuff that
I would disagree with this, actually. I think that especially in the last portal cycle, Notre Dame took not for the first time ever, but like pretty much for the first time ever, underclassmen transfers, which that was a academic hurdle where, like, Riley Leonard, for example, was a underclassman transfer technically from Duke, and there was consternation about his credits not transferring. And it's okay, we're bringing in a quarterback that we're paying a ton of money to, exactly, but we're worried about what major he's going to be because he doesn't have like the requisite credits to transfer in. And so there has been that tension with Notre Dame and football and academics and basketball, especially women's basketball included, for like as my entire life. But I think that what I have heard from folks is that people are really want to work with Marcus Freeman on this. Like there is a understanding that like we can all work together and figure out some solutions here to get undergraduate transfers. And we're not trying to be a Stanford where it's almost impossible to get anyone. But I think the core thing that you mentioned, Richard, is not that they're a developmental program necessarily. It's that Marcus Freeman believes in retaining the players he has, and he thinks that they're all good enough to not have to be replaced with guys in the portal. And I think so far, like at least with this team, I believe that that's true. So the portal is more like supplementing areas like defensive line where they're thin, or
receiver where they're trying to find somebody.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And so that's why they're not taking a huge quantity, but they don't really have to do that.
Right, and I will give Notre Dame credit, and any team that does this credit. Like, and Alex actually says this, like every year when we do this, like if you're gonna like portal receivers, like they just pretty much grow on trees. Like it is what it is.
Yeah. There's a lot of them out there, so find some that work for you. I think that though, where the wide receiver thing comes from, Alex, is that there were like a couple of years in a row early in the Marcus Freeman tenure where, and I think this was also the end of the Kelly era overlapping, it wasn't really a strong recruiting point, and I think that they've sort of fixed some of that and also had some good luck in the portal with like the Malachi Fieldses of the world, that type of like big body type that you can bring in a grad transfer year.
Jess, you mentioned Brian Kelly. I have not mentioned that if people want to hear you talk about Notre Dame football, they can do so on the Echoes podcast, which you co-host with our friend Mike Golick Jr. And it is a great way to stay up to date on this program, not just in Split Zone Duo season preview time, but year round. But I noticed that Brian Kelly is returning to the Notre Dame podcast circuit. He appeared on the Independent, another Notre Dame podcast, last week. It sounded like he was now back in the Chicago South Bend corridor and attempting to maybe make himself sort of like a dean of the program type of guy. Like,
please do not besmirch. Please do not besmirch my CBS colleague Brian Kelly.
Yeah,
I'm not besmirching him. There's no besmirchment.
I'll besmirch him for both of you. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So if Brian Kelly wants to come on the Echoes to sort of establish himself as, like a grandparent of the Notre Dame program, what would you be asking him first?
That's a really good question. If he were coming on the show, I would have I said this on my podcast this week, Alex. I would want to ask him about specific games and specific things that he did during those games and why they happened. The example I gave on my show, why'd you throw the ball 26 times in a hurricane in 2016? What was going on in your head? I would like to think that now that he has hundreds of millions of dollars, literally, and
he should. If he's invested wisely, he should.
Probably more, a lot more. And is no longer actively coaching a team. We can kind of look back and laugh at some of this stuff, or at least be like, so why'd you crap the bed against Michigan in 2019? Like, what happened there? Like, those sorts of questions is where I would like to take it, because, well, I think some people are interested in and hate listening to him talk about his career and things of that nature. Like, he is just always been such a politician where he's not going to say anything that's going, like, he's not gonna, like, we're not gonna get anything out of him and what happened and all of that. And I don't really know if people are that interested in that. But he was the coach for 11 years and oversaw some interesting games. And those are the things that I'd like him to possibly reflect on. But alas, that's why he wouldn't come on our podcast.
Yeah. Jess would like to set up a confessional Catholic term.
Yeah, there you go. The other thing, Alex, is like Notre Dame fans are so mad that he's coming to campus to visit camp, like fall camp or whatever. Exactly, Richard.
He hired Marcus Freeman. Like,
he hired Marcus Freeman. He was in Mike Denbrock's wedding. Like, they go way. He goes way back with these people. And also, I'm like, Marcus Freeman is not the kind of person to be like, hey man, F off. We don't want you near us. He's the kind of person to be like, you can come here, I'll sun you a little bit, and then you can be on your way. Like,
yes.
And that's fine. And I'm not offended by it. Now, this is completely separate than like if they did some sort of big like video board thing for him at a game, which I do not think would ever happen. I think there are
You don't
still,
think that would ever happen? You don't think that'll ever happen?
I don't think that that would be I think everyone that works at Notre Dame would have to like retire before that would happen.
Right. Ever's a long time though.
There's so much.
Ever's a long time.
Yeah, that's true. There's so much overlap between like people who were there when he was there and people who are there now that like they're not, and like the fans aren't asking for it. So like who would do it?
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like who's the driving force behind like, let's honor Brian Kelly. If he had won a championship, that's a different story.
Sure.
He was back on campus for Lou Holtz's funeral earlier this year. So it's not like he's never been back or never coming back again. But I don't care if he visits fall camp, whatever. It's not, doesn't matter to me.
Jessica Smetana of the Echoes podcast and one of our favorite recurring guests. Jess, come back and see us throughout the college football season. Anytime I'm here. Great to have you. Go Irish. Or no, I'm not doing that.
No, good.
Thank you for your
time. I like Richard's confession joke. That's good.
Alex, that's actually the second half of the Echoes podcast that I have spent significant time with in as many weeks. Big 12 Media Days had a nice meal with friend of the program, as we discussed, Mike Golick Jr., the other half of the Echoes duo.
He's a fun guy. Notre Dame has a good media situation. They got a lot of beat reporters, a lot of talented people who have chosen to devote their lives to Notre Dame football for reasons that obviously we can't relate to, but Notre Dame fans are very well served. Richard, the other half of the FBS independence, before we move on to an entire conference here, the UConn Huskies, a program that you spent some time around last year because you were doing sideline reporting, your debut, which was great for CBS Sports Network. The thing is, I'm curious how much you think you know about this program, given that the head coach is gone and they are about 134th in returning production.
Yeah. Between Gordon Samas going to TCU and Jim Moore going to Colorado State, it pretty much everything that wasn't nailed down to the floor went out the door. And I think there was some draft as well. I think the wide receiver Skylar Bell went to the draft among some other guys. So it's a blank slate up there in West Hartford, which, you know, kind of is what it is. That kind of comes with the territory. Basically, and look, we're going to get this gets even worse when we get to the Pac-12 portion of the program. But like, we're talking about whole two deeps, or the majority of the two deep on defense at UConn getting replaced, and a decent chunk, a big chunk of the offensive two deep getting replaced. So you gotta go with a fine tooth comb to figure out something that you like. Kevon Sherman at linebacker will bud that. He comes over from Toledo with Jason Candle, 14.5 TFLs last year. Kai Wilson is a transfer in FCS wide receiver from Youngstown as well. If they're going to have a big play guy, I'm guessing it's going to be him. But it's one of those situations where how do you evaluate a team that is this portaled? And again, both of us acknowledge often that it sucks to say that during a preview, and we do try to find something, especially when you get down to the G6 level for conference preview season. But that is part of the evaluation. That it just is, especially with a new coach.
Yeah, you have to be more humble than even we should be about everybody else, and about a lot of teams like Notre Dame. Just there, Richard, you weren't very humble. You know, you were taking it on faith that that's going to be a playoff team, that they're going to contend for the national championship. And part of the reason you can do that is not just because you believe in the payroll and all the 4-star players on their roster, but because they are kind of at the polar opposite end of the portal spectrum. Not only do they not have a new coach, but as you said with Jess, they just don't turn over that much year to year. Not that they don't use the portal. Just mentioned DJ McKinney, who might be my favorite transfer that they have this year, the cornerback from Colorado and Oklahoma State before that. But with UConn, it's like 80 of those guys, not 80, but it's upwards of 60 new players, which a couple of years ago was pretty quaint. And, you know, now it's just a thing that happens. I think I tend to like the parts of this that are the Toledo imports. You mentioned Kevon Sherman, who should be their best player. And UConn has had a handful of actually really good linebackers. They had them in the Jim Mora era, and seems like he could be the latest of that type. They have a tackle, Eshawn Carter, who is coming here, along with a defensive end, Anas Lukman. The two of them combined for about 15 tackles for loss last year at their previous spots. But there are guys here who have some track records and who, in some cases, have continuity with the head coach. And so I don't think this is likely to be, if we were just taking the best stab that we can at it, I don't think this is likely to be a return to the dark ages this year for UConn football. I think Candle's a better coach than that. I tend to think that the roster is better than that. And there's a number of Toledo people on the offense as well. The defense has been the strong part of that program. One thing that is intriguing to me is that UConn schedules sort of unlike any other team in the sport. And so they have a lot of games this year, home games too, against teams like Syracuse, Belichick's North Carolina, Maryland is going to UConn this year. They are playing James Madison this year, which is another team that we really don't know what they're going to look like. They're playing.
All right, but you better watch out on that one.
They're just playing a lot of games that feel fairly toss-up-y, especially before we know what they are. I mean, I think that UConn should lose to Maryland and probably North Carolina and definitely James Madison. And, we'll see about a lower tier ACC team like Syracuse, but they've also just scheduled into a lot of variance, like a lot of middle, lower class P4s that you don't know how good they're going to be. So I think their SP plus projection this year is 5 wins, but given how little we know, could it be 2? Probably not. Could it be 3? Sure. Could it be as high as maybe 7? Yeah. This is just an extremely wide variance deal for UConn this season.
All right, Alex, podcast business time.
Yes, Richard. Natural commercial break as we go between the Independents and the Pac-12 here. I want to say thank you to our partners at Home Field, who have delightful collections for both of the independent schools that we just talked about and for so many of the other schools that we're going to discuss in preview season. You can find their wares at homefieldapparel.com. Really, all football season and all throughout the year, Home Field is trying very hard to continue to come up with new, creative, very comfortable, very good-looking college sports clothes for you. And they have some incredible things in the works. Richard, they also have some things in the works for us, by the way. You may have noticed some pretty golfy hats, the new Game Flow hats that are out with Home Field Apparel. Now, I don't see you wearing a lot of hats when we play golf. Are you willing to make an exception for the Game Flow hats that Home Field is putting out?
No, and it's nothing to do on Home Field. It's more a functional thing. As I've told you, I've discussed being a visor guy, have not committed all the way, but I am taking visits with high crown visors. We'll see what happens.
I will wear enough of the Home Field Game Flow hats for the both of us. And there is, in fact, a UConn that was released in the prominent early collection. Thank you very much to our partners at homefieldapparel.com. You can find them on socials as well. I also want to say thank you to Nokian Tires. Richard, you're off on a big road trip after we record this one. Granted, it's largely aerial. Nokian Tires does focus a lot on R&D. They've yet to crack the ocean drive, but we'll talk to them and we'll see if they can work on that in the future.
Yeah, I trust the folks at Nokian Tires implicitly if they were to do that. I was at Turks and Caicos in February, and when you go there, there's like a jet ski that is a Lamborghini, like jet ski, not the brand, I mean like the model. So it looks like literally like a Lamborghini on the water. It's actively insane. And that is what I think of when I think a water tire. If Nokian would be able to figure something out like that. Or like the Aston Martin James Bond deal from when we were kids. Sure. When the Pierce Brosnan Bond, when they brought that in. They have still not made a decision on that. I'm an Idris Elba Bond person, but I don't think he wants to do it from what I read.
Oh, he'd be great. He'd be terrific. Yeah. Idris is just so handsome. Honestly, Idris could do anything. And I would say, Idris, I'm ready to follow you into war. That's a Split Zone Duo LLC commentary. Does not reflect Nokian Tires' views of who should be the next Bond. But yes, Nokian Tires, the inventors of the winter tire, not yet of a tire that can drive you over the ocean. And I suspect that may be at least a few years off. But we want to say thank you to our partners at Nokian Tires. If you're in the market for new tires, ask your tire dealer about them when you are in that shopping process. We think you'll be very happy that you did. Richard, let's continue with the Pac-12. In the past couple of years, we have done a standalone Pac-12 preview that was just Washington State and Oregon State, and we didn't combine it with anything else because we wanted the Pac-12 to stand alone. Now we don't have to be so performative about it because the Pac-12 is back to being a conference-sized conference, albeit a small one. Let's go over the league. So you have the two holdovers, Washington State and Oregon State, and then you have 6 other states that are coming aboard here. You have San Diego State, Boise State, Texas State, Fresno State, Utah State, and Colorado State to make an 8-team football league. There is a conference championship game. Week 13, Thanksgiving time, is the so-called Flex Week, which is a new thing, and I commend the Pac-12 for their creativity on this. The Flex Week enables the Pac-12 to put together matchups based on how the season has gone that are not going to count towards the conference standings, but are designed at a structural level to give teams opportunities to improve their resumes and to improve the league's positioning for bowls in the playoff. I know this is a particular conference office where we got some listeners, and I say to you, kudos, because you're doing something legitimately new at this level that has not been done here before. And I like that. Usually, quote unquote, innovation in conference offices these days is not actually new or fresh. This is. And so I am curious to see how this is going to unfold as the season goes along.
Yeah, I spent some time with the Pac-12 brass at the Big 12 media days. Yes, they were there at the Big 12 media days down the street from the Star. They sort of like rented out a restaurant out. And I think that's one of the situations where you look at, oh, they are doing something new. Another thing that they did new is they didn't do media days. Pac-12 was like, oh, we're not doing media days. We're going to take that budget and spend it elsewhere, probably. I think what will be interesting is how they spend it if Boise State is, for instance, 9-0 on rallying folks behind the cause to get them in the college football playoff. I think what's interesting with the Pac-12, the new Pac, the whatever we're calling it, is, and we've talked about this, where Oregon State and Washington State slot in this new league, because you had to fill out a league, or you wanted to fill out a league. You're Oregon State and Washington State. That's what you chose to do. So you empowered Pac-12 leadership to do that. They went and did it. They got one standard bearer. They got one change agent in Texas State. Another team that's kind of always there in Fresno State. Obviously, they haven't really fallen off. You've got the potentials, San Diego State and Colorado State. I would sort of lump in to the potentials. And then Utah State, you don't really fit into any of my neat buckets. You're also here.
Utah State's had a couple of 10-win seasons, I think roughly in the time that we've been doing this. They can be good. It's been done recently. The health of the league is going to be a conversation that just kind of floats around the Pac-12 for a while, because this was the league that you could say died. It certainly died in its old form. It's been reborn now in a different incarnation. People want to know about the media rights deal. I want to know about the media rights deal. The commissioner, Teresa Gold, has declined to say what it is, what the dollar amounts are to the schools. I saw that in an interview with John Canzano, one of the deans of West Coast college football journalism. She says it's not productive to say. I would interpret that as probably the media rights deal isn't that good. But here's the thing. I don't have any more appetite for Pac-12 media deal discourse, really. George Kliavkoff and Larry Scott euthanized that horse. They didn't do it so humanely a long time ago. And so I'm ready to just watch football in this league. I'm ready to just
where are you going to watch
about
it?
Sports business.
CW, baby.
There is some CBS Sports, some CW.
That's right.
USA has some of this league this year. They're going to be around, and they'll be one of those leagues that is kind of spread on various platforms. How long will the league look exactly like this? Do you have a read on that?
On as far as the number of teams in it?
Number of teams, which teams they are. It's I think reasonably well guessed that this league would like UNLV, but didn't get UNLV, obviously, which stayed in the Mountain West. The other 6 came from the Mountain West.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that, or I shouldn't say I know. I think that merger thing, not exactly in the cards. I think let's see how this amalgamation of the league looks. And I do think you've got a nice amalgamation because they do fit into those buckets that I sort of discussed a little bit earlier. Well, at least most of them do fit into that. You've got like teams, you've got teams that are in reasonable distance from each other. I'm interested in what this is going to look like. I am not, however, terribly interested in I think there is a positioning that the Pac-12 is doing that they are the fifth best conference. I'm not quite sure that they are. And even if they are, that does not a Power 5 make.
No. I mean, the best G6 conference is the American right now.
Yes.
I don't think it's that close. Although we'll see what Boise could lift this league to. Kind of similarly, what can the Sun Belt be lifted to by James Madison? It's a good pivot point to talk about the teams, the 8 teams that are going to make up this league. Let's start with the runaway favorites. I have the Boise State Rosebud and Thorn assignment. Question, Richard. We do not do too much sports betting here, but I think this is a useful case to understand perception. What would you think is Boise State's odds as like favorites of this league? How likely would you say it is? Even money, more likely that Boise wins the Pac-12? How likely do you think the markets would say it is that Boise wins this league?
It's obviously more likely than not. I'm more interested in everybody else's odds than I am Boise's odds.
Interesting that you would say more likely than not. It is not, which surprised me. Boise is heavily favored to win this league. They are about plus 175, but plus 175 for the conversion there is a little bit under 50% likelihood. Actually, a decent bit under 50% likelihood, according to the betting markets, that they would win this league. I was surprised by that. They are the second best odds to win a league in FBS this year, but they're longer odds than Texas Tech are to win the Big 12. So when I was guessing, I was actually thinking that the consensus on this would be that Boise was far and away likely to win the conference. The public sees some vulnerability here, which was interesting to me because of how often they won the old Mountain West that looks a lot like this league and just how much more talented they seem. But let's be open-minded about it because there's other possibilities here. My rose is that you just know that they're going to be good. There's no cratering potential here. And in the entire G6, how many teams can you say that about?
Like 5. And they are one of them. They are one of them.
They're one of them in part because they have coaching continuity. Spencer Danielson continues to be the head coach of this team. But also they just seem to be financially and culturally a little different from just about every other program in the G6. Maybe aside from James Madison or the tippy top of the American.
But I don't disagree that Boise's not the best team in this league. What I would say is Boise's not coming in this league on the front foot. Like Boise got flat embarrassed a couple times last year. And I'm not even talking about the Notre Dame game, which you can put that to one side. When you go out there and you lose by 30 points to Fresno, or you lose by 30 points to USF on opening night, like that's not, we can't be having that.
I would agree that they're coming in on the back foot. The funny thing is, despite being a worse team last year than they had been in probably a decade, maybe more, they finished 64th in SP+, well worse, and they lost 5 games. Either of those metrics, we hadn't seen a Boise that bad since we've been doing this podcast, and well before it. Despite that, they won their league. They just
that is a Mountain West treatise. That is the Mountain West more than it is.
I have to tell you that this is
half of it. Yes,
a lot of the Mountain West, except UNLV's not there, which takes away what had been their biggest foil, or at least their most threatening foil. Didn't ultimately really foil them the last couple of seasons. So I think they're somewhat back-footed, but because of the continuity, unlikely to be anything but good to very good. Maddox Madsen is not that guy who's going to elevate you to winning a playoff game on his own. No, but you know that you can win with him because they have for several years now. The running back tandem that they have, Sire Gaines and Dylan Riley, would be a nice running back tandem in the SEC or Big Ten. It's one of the handful of best in the country, in my opinion, and it's at Boise. I think the offensive line and most of the defense will play at well above a G6 level. They have a couple holes. I don't know a ton about who we should rely on and trust to make downfield explosive passing plays for them. Chris Marshall, really talented, probable future NFL receiver, left them on the Taylor Green path for Arkansas. But there's just a degree of continuity here that is that makes them lock, stock, and barrel that you can't say for many of their peers. My thorn is actually also Maddox Madsen, even though I include him in the continuity that gives them a floor. I've about seen enough of him as a guy who could be anything more than he is. I wonder if and he was hurt a bit last year. Hopefully he'll be well, feeling good this year. I wonder if you feel any differently about the quarterback for Boise State, who struggled a lot in the playoff a couple years ago, was hurt last year, is back for another year as Boise starter.
No, I'm in accord with you on that one. To the point, quite frankly, where I wonder if we see some Cash Herrera, maybe not, but I'm curious.
Maybe not, but maybe so. My bud is that Boise, despite being different in the ways that we just laid out, is starting to act a little bit more like every other G6. They took 19 transfers this winter, which according to Nathan Carroll of 24/7 Sports was the most in the history of the program. So that's even the most stable group of 6 program knows that the old way can't work anymore and it requires a change in approach. The main notable player here, per Nathan, the guy who's likeliest to be a starter at a key position, is the left tackle Tyler Etheridge from Division II Colorado State Pueblo. That's a big eval there, Richard, because he's replacing Cage Casey, who was a 4th-round pick by the other Orange and Blue Broncos in Denver and was just a mauler for them for several years on that line. They've lost a couple of their other veteran stalwarts on both sides of the ball. Ty Benefield, the safety, probably the headliner on the defense. They do have, despite all of it, just more up in the air than usual. And I think they've got comparatively a strong roster budget. I think they've got reason for us to trust them on evals. But this is more uncertainty with Boise than we're used to talking about, even as it is less than pretty much anybody else in their position.
Yeah, but I don't think, to me, that's a feature of the new paradigm in college football. That's year over year pulling blocks out of the Jenga tower of stability that this program was year over year over year over year. So yes, playoff run, awesome. And then you have a year like last year. What happens this year? Is it approximate to last year? Or are they able to raise the level a little bit to get somewhere between playoff and disappointment, which is, funny enough, kind of what last year was, even though they won the league.
Yeah, best player on the team is probably Jaden Virgin Morgan, defensive end. Huge sack totals 2 years ago, not as big last year, but still a lot of TFLs, and they've hung on to him. He had 13 TFLs last year. They've hung on to him. I'm sure that there was no short list of programs that would have very much liked to have taken him away from Boise, and they still got him. So watch for him this season. Richard, elsewhere in this conference, the chasers, the likeliest teams maybe to come and get them, San Diego State.
San Diego State, I think, had maybe the most shocking identity. I don't even want to say crisis because it worked out for them last year, but I maybe identity and just leave it full stop. Maybe identity surprise. I think they're going to get back to doing business the way you expect them to with Sean Lewis as head coach, primarily because that great defense last year is more or less gutted, but they do bring back a lot of the good skill talent that they had last year, including Jordan Napier, Lucky Sutton in the backup running back, Christian Washington. So I think when you have that, I think you can do some of, Aztec Fast as the branding that Sean Lewis put on that. And then they didn't really go Aztec Fast last year in the classic way that you would expect, kind of the way that the Colorado team that he had went and some of the other teams at Kent that Sean Lewis had. They did. So I think they're going to get back a little bit towards that. I think he knew that we might as well, if our defense is going to be so good, let's not put them in the situation where we're potentially really fast 3 and out. Let's protect that defense. I don't know that they can do that this year. I think they've got to get back to business the way Lewis probably wants to do it on offense.
Yeah, probably. They had Trey White the last couple of years, edge rusher, kind of on the same lines of Jaden Virgin Morgan, who I just mentioned from Boise, who it was really impressive to keep him as long as they did, but then Texas Tech called, and you know how that goes, so he's gone now. I think further support of your theory is that the quarterback and both of the big running backs, Jaden Denegal, Lucky Sutton, Christian Washington, Denegal is a running quarterback. They're all back, and they're replacing a lot on the offensive line, but I definitely think you're onto something that San Diego State will start to program identity-wise be a little bit more like what we would have guessed they would have been when they hired this guy who scored all these points at Kent State and who had been for a year at Colorado as head coach 3 off seasons ago. Now, I'm with you on that. And you know what? That's great. I'm tired of a team that is coached by a guy who has this offensive track record and is in Southern California of being in the 90s or lower in offensive SP+. We have not, in the existence of this podcast, covered a San Diego State team that was better than 91st in offensive SP+. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's 8 years
Yeah.
of a team with access to the SoCal recruiting footprint being 90th or worse in offensive SP+. Unacceptable. Unacceptable. And they did have several amazing defenses in that run under both Brady Hoke and last year under Sean Lewis. But don't care, man. You're in San Diego. You don't have so much beef. You have a lot of speed within a couple hours of you. Go and get it. Score some points. I'm done with anything else. That's what I want to see this year. And I think that's what we will see. Considerably far norther in California, Fresno State, they went 9-4 in Matt Entz's first year. Matt Entz, of course, the former North Dakota State head coach who had done a quick stop over at USC under Lincoln Riley before taking this job last season. My rose is that they had an incredible pass defense last year, probably the best in the whole group of 6, at least statistically. I'd feel confident saying that. The short story is that they lost several star defensive backs, but they have a strong pipeline of people at all levels of the defense, especially defensive back. Their nickelback, Simeon Harris, was just kind of a hellraiser last year. Lots of PBUs, lots of sniffing around opposing backfields. He is back. They have double-digit returning sacks from either their roster or other rosters last year. The big transfer here is Dylan Hampston from Sacramento State, which is an interesting reminder that there is a pecking order sort of at every region of this country. And in northern central California, Fresno is able to pick off a really important guy from a program like Sac State, even as they're going to FBS this year as well. I think you probably feel about as good
I would
about
imagine,
this defense as any.
I was going to say, I would imagine they weren't in FBS when he left, to be fair.
True. This is a good point because the Sac State thing came in the middle of the offseason. That's a very good point. This should be one of the handful of best defenses in the group of 6. It has been often, and I would think that it would be again. They're just good at this. They were 37th in defensive SP+ last year. To have a top 40 unit, either offense or defense, in this economy especially, literally is really impressive for them. My thorn is that the passing game was abominable, and it probably will be again. The quarterback situation last year was a trade back and forth. They just couldn't settle on a guy. There had been a little bit of injury here as well. It was EJ Warner and Carson Conklin trading the job and producing a combined 14 touchdowns and 13 picks. It's 2 new guys this year. Well, 1 new guy and 1 holdover from the depth chart. The holdover is Jaden Mandel, and the portal guy is Christian Martin from Maryland. It sounds like Martin is a little bit likelier to start based on their camp reps. I'm unfairly down on any Maryland portal quarterback, I know, because, we all have our crosses to bear in this life. But I think that they're not very likely to throw the ball around the field in a way that sparks joy. this season. They haven't done that in a little while. It's funny. Last week we were talking about David Carr, Richard, 25 years ago at Fresno State. They have not had quite a David Carr walk through the door, but I would settle for a Jake Haener, who was a favorite of ours in the early days of Split Zone Duo. Just a real gunslinger quarterback who stood in there and took a lot of hits and still led them to some really good wins. Budwise, I think it's the general roster building approach that Entz has been deploying, which paid some dividends in the first year. They won 9 games. Bill Connolly, our friend at ESPN, has made the point that he is trying to make this thing North Dakota State West. And I can sort of see what Bill is talking about there, just with the variety of FCS and lower G6 transfers that they are leaning on to try to get good. There's different ways. I'm curious for your thought on this, that you can approach the portal as a slightly upper class G6 team. And one of them is and obviously the best are doing some version of all of this at once. One of them is to take a lot of bounce backs from the upper levels and think that they'll be better suited at that level. So, the former 4-star from Washington who didn't work out might come down to Fresno or something like that. Anecdotally, though, I don't think we have scholarship to prove this. I think the lift ups from a place like Sacramento State, a program like Northern Illinois, where they are relying on a DB this year, just seems to me like it's a better fit for a guy who comes from talent evaluation at a lower level and knows what a good player looks like, who could rise rather than who is already falling.
Yeah, but I think you have to have the bona fides of being, Entz has the bona fides of being an FCS champion, so I get it. But I think when you are in a situation in the FCS where you know how to do more with less just overall, and I know it's a stretch to say North Dakota State was doing more with less, but you still have to sort through if you're North Dakota State. You do not get the pick of the litter, especially just because of where you are geographically at North Dakota State. So if you have the FCS scouting bona fides and plaudits, then I can see it applying to this. I think when you take bounce backs, as you were saying, sometimes you take character risks that you might not otherwise do. Now, that's fine if they play well, but it's not so fine when they don't. And that's a thing that a lot of that's a thing that even the highest FBS programs have to deal with sometimes. So I'm not saying that's an FCS problem or a low FBS problem. But yeah, I think because of what Entz did at the level, you could then sit here and say, all right, I've got some confidence that he's going to be able to do that at this level. I mean, he's not Kurt Signetti, but Signetti did this too. Signetti did the call ups and develop, and look what they just did. I'm not saying Fresno State's going to win the national championship 16-0, but there's proof in the pudding there.
Yeah. And what Signetti didn't do a lot of, obviously they took a lot of transfers off of power conference rosters. They didn't take a lot of didn't work out guys at other schools. They poached guys who other
they took guys who produced.
Yes. And they brought guys up who produced. They didn't do a lot of the didn't work out, so we think that they can play here thing. And Fresno is doing a bit of that. I mentioned the quarterback, Christian Martin. He comes from Maryland. But I think Entz, last year they were trying to make something happen out of a converted wrestler in fall camp on their defensive line. I just think Entz seems to trust that he can identify and he can find guys who will be able to play at this level. And I think given his resume, that's a smart approach, and it got them to a 9-win debut for him. And I'm generally optimistic that it will continue to work for him in this job. Richard, take us to Utah State University.
Don't know how good this team's going to be honest with you. One of the worst defenses in college football last year, or at least in this league. Maybe not college football, but at least in this league, or the version of the league that they were in last year. No Bryson Barnes this year. Barnes is in the CFL. He was a lot of this offense, especially the running offense, and was a really big dual threat for them. So how they're going to go about that this year, going to be quite curious. I think the Utah State thing, dude, they've been so bad on defense for 5 years running. They've been really, really bad. The safety was one of the team's leaders in tackles, which is not really what you want, but he does come back. I guess we can butt that in Brevin Hamlin. He is joined by 19 defensive transfers, so we're bringing in a lot of guys. So I do, however, look favorably on bringing in a lot of guys when you're one of the worst defenses in college football last year, or at least one of the worst defenses in your league last year.
Yeah, I concur with all that. He's a good football coach. They seem to have had a couple years ago. I was tracking this. I was trying to find evidence of this and looking up to the preview. They had some like odd administrative discord and things like the student body being really dissatisfied with the program and getting scolded for not wanting to come out to games. And there was the very ugly end to Blake Anderson's time there. It looks like everyone's a bit happier with one another right now at Utah State. It looks like they found stability. And I was thinking about it in the time that we've done this show, they've had a lot of the opposite. Like in the early years of Split Zone Duo, we were founded in 2020. They made that ill-advised Gary Anderson second run hire that worked poorly and left them in a weird place. And then the Anderson thing went generally poorly, though they squeezed a conference title into there in the middle. It looks to me from my scouring of the USU football internet, and I think we have a few Utah State listeners who I'd love to hear from to get your sense of this. I think everyone's kind of simpatico now. They seem normal, and they have some money, as we always talk about with all the Utah football schools. Not as much as Utah and BYU. I think the arrow is pointing, up-ish, like maybe not straight up skyward at Utah State right now, but they got back to a bowl game in Broncos' first year after falling to 4-8 in the interim year in 24. He's such a proven program builder that I just tend to think, we're going in a good direction with Utah State. Elsewhere in this conference, Richard, I have Washington State. Do you like a teardown? Because we have a teardown here.
I don't think your boy's on this team anymore, is he?
Who's my boy?
Zevi.
Oh, no, I don't think this year. In fact, I know he is not. Yes, this is 2 years that I have been talking up Zevi Eckhouse, the quarterback, who a couple years ago lost the job to John Mateer after I anointed him in the preview and then did play for them last year. I got to tell you, I'm actually going to bud this year the quarterback again. Wazoo has this gravity-defying way of having very interesting quarterbacks every year, despite all of the headwinds that they have been facing. This year's guy is Caden Pinnock, who did enormous numbers in FCS last year as a redshirt freshman at UC Davis. Statistically speaking, best Division I freshman quarterback last year. Yes, it was FCS. Yes, it was redshirt, but over 3,000 passing yards, over 400 rushing, 35 touchdowns accounted for. Kind of amazing at any level for a roughly 19-year-old quarterback who has 3 more-ish seasons that he could play in college ball. There's room to run there. I kind of know what Washington State fans might be thinking right now, which is like in a good way and a bad way. Here we go again. Like, what if this guy pops off this year and you have him for 1 year in the way that you had Cam Ward, in the way that you had John Mateer as a starter for 1 year? That might happen. I'm kind of having visions of the portal cycle in after the season where if this guy does what I think he could do, where they're calling for him again and Wazoo just has to keep restocking. But he's definitely the most exciting quarterback in this league this year. If you just look at upside, and obviously the downside is big anytime you're bringing up someone into a new program from FCS, but this dude's big. He can move, legitimate dual threat, not one of those like fake 2020s dual threat quarterbacks who, runs a lot between the tackles, but can't really make plays in the open field and isn't much of a battering ram either. This guy's got it, at least from a scouting perspective. And I'd like to see what it looks like on the field in this league. My rose here is that the offensive skill guys look solid. The running back Kirby Voorhees came over with Jimmy Rogers from South Dakota State last year. When Jimmy Rogers went to Iowa State and was replaced by Kirby Moore, who I should mention the new head coach, Voorhees remained on this team. He had a very nice performance, including a 47-yard touchdown run when Wazoo had Ole Miss in hell last year. You remember that game where it really looked like Lane was going to lose to Washington State? Kind of the rumbling white running back who was just going over them, Toby Gerhart style. That was this guy, Kirby Voorhees. Ole Miss fans will remember watching this guy galloping in the open field. They got Trey Lechner, who is the first team All Pac-12 tight end this year. Not the stiffest statistical competition for that. He had about 200 yards for the whole year, but that included coming on very strong at the very end of the season. They have not stopped churning out good offensive skill position players the last few years. And with that quarterback and the running back, I think they could do it again. I kind of think that they're going to score points despite the identity of this program last year, or the better side of the ball, certainly being the defense. I think they're going to have some pretty pieces on offense and probably improve on that side, even with all the turnover. If I was guessing, from the 87 finish that they had in offensive SP plus last year, after being top 40 or so in most years, going back to the middle of the Mike Leach tenure. Can you guess what my thorn would be?
I think that, player Isaac Terrell last year, who was a TFL guy, I should say a havoc play guy for them. He's at Iowa State. There was some Iowa State hewing out of this roster, which you expect when your head coach leaves in the way that he did.
Yeah. They just lost so much. This is what is happening here kind of year after year right now. The best stat for this is from Bill, whose season previews this year have been amazing and who I've enjoyed having doing these comprehensive previews that I've used in my prep. They had 17 guys at 200 snaps last year on the defense, which was, again, the better side of the ball. And 17 of 17 are gone. So Trent Bray, the fired Oregon State head coach, is in as coordinator. He knows defense really well.
Sure. All right. Not sure that I look lovingly on that, but all right.
I think you have to think back to when he was coordinating the Oregon State defenses under Jonathan Smith before they both went on. Honestly, Jonathan Smith going to Michigan State messed everything up for everybody. He was not a good fit for that job.
I would agree.
Trent Bray was clearly not ready to be Oregon State's head coach in these circumstances where Oregon State had been confronting the economic realities that they were confronting. Trent Bray back as a defensive coordinator at this level seems fine to me. It's been, only 3 years or so since he was last doing that. But it's a lot to put together out of complete nowhere. They were 32nd defensive SP plus last year. They managed to win 7 games, dragging along a pretty mid offense, even by G6 standards. They lost the whole boat. Trent Bray had those Oregon State defenses forced a lot of turnovers, created a lot of havoc plays, were punching well above their recruiting rate, kind of in the early NIL years when Jonathan Smith was cooking in that gig. So the bull case is you got the fun quarterback. The head coach, Kirby Moore, is an accomplished offensive coordinator. They will figure out points, and Trent Bray can figure out defense in the way he once did in Corvallis. There's a lot of reasons why all those things wouldn't work with the roster turnover that they have, but as ever, Washington State's going to keep chugging. And could they be the best non-Boise team in this league this year? I think it's possible, not likely, but
that's wild.
I said possible. Richard, in the Mountain West this year, outside of Boise State, you're telling me you'd be stunned if any of these teams we talked about managed to be the second or third best team in this league?
How is it not San Jose or Fresno? Odds on. And Texas State maybe is a dark horse. I think that's pretty lock, stock, and barrel.
I assume you didn't mean San Jose. I assume you meant San Diego State. Just catching you on the misspeak, but we'll leave it.
San Diego, thank you. They all look alike. Situation.
I think the answer is the quarterback, mainly. I think the quarterback that is in at Washington State, though it's an FCS transfer up, is the most exciting quarterback in this league, period. We'll talk about Texas State's Brad Jackson. That actually might not be fair to him, but certainly more exciting, lower floor, but more exciting, higher upside than Maddox Madsen at Boise State, definitely than Jaden Denigal at San Diego State. I just mentioned the Fresno quarterback situation not being much to write home about at the moment. You mentioned Bryson Barnes is no longer at Utah State. So, they got a compelling quarterback situation. And I think the upside here in an upwardly mobile league is real. It's just the downside is also so real. So real. Bottom falling out potential. super real as well.
To Oregon State, Jamarcus Shepard, new head coach there, obviously wants to be there. Ton of juice. If you look at some of his early press conference clips, really exciting guy and excited to be there. I think they also have, not I think I know, obviously, new athletic director there. That was an absolute mess. It's hopefully figured out. And you're in a new day in Oregon State with a guy who comes with NFL plaudits, knows football administration, you would think, comes from Ohio State, all that sort of stuff. So I think Bud, maybe Rose, the administrative situation on top of football heading into this new day, I think you feel a little bit better about, especially with a new head coach and a first-year head coach. So we'll see how that plays out. The Bud, however, I'm legitimately curious about this guy, Xavier Noland, who comes in from UTRGV. He's literally a 70-yard touchdown waiting to happen at receiver. Not exactly going to give you a 12-catch performance, but he was a bucket at the FCS level. And I'm interested to see, we talk about FCS call-ups, I'm interested to see how he transitions up and how he delivers some explosives for this team. Mike McIntyre, also veteran defensive coordinator, which I did not realize he was here. I think that helps for sure for a new head coach and a first-time head coach. I think being a steady hand there, or having a steady hand there, is going to be big. Malik Murphy is a player at quarterback who actually hasn't been in college football that long, but just feels like he's been in college football that long because you've been hearing about him for so long.
Yeah.
And he returns.
I mean, so I'm thinking of Malik Murphy as the well-liked Texas backup.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of him as the not very good Duke starter. I'm thinking of him as the not very good Oregon State starter.
His Texas backup year was 2023. Yeah. His Texas backup year was 2023 when he left the Horns during a playoff run to transfer to Duke.
Yes. He was in front of Arch. He was judged by Steve Sarkisian and company to be, granted with more experience, to be ahead of the most hyped quarterback ever in 23. Got a look at Duke. It didn't go well. That was an ugly passing game there. And it wasn't sparking a ton of joy, as you would say, last year in this gig either. They were 126th in offensive SP+. And man, he tried, and it was a hard situation. Remember also this team last year, their special teams was continually blowing it and putting them in bad field position. So giving them another shot, totally cool. It's not like it makes a ton of sense for them while they were getting their house in order administratively to be splashing the cash for a majorly touted quarterback. But it was ugly last year in every way that it could be ugly. Hope for better things this time around. He's got a lot of experience. He's got some pedigree from his days. Like Texas loved this guy. Like he was viewed as a guy who could play if needed to at Texas. He was I believe a high 3-star or low 4-star recruit when he came out. He's got some background that would suggest that this guy could put it together late in his career. We know how rarely that happens, but wish the best for him. Texas State, Richard. Here's my rose. This is a crazy fact. And I believe it's right as I was going after it. I'll actually break it down for you from a high level. My rose is going to be the offense. My thorn is going to be the defense. They are currently very much a mid-2000s Oklahoma style program.
All right.
They can score.
I'll take it.
They can't defend. And that's just what it's going to be again this year. The defense is going to be terrible, and I don't really feel like spending our listeners' time talking about the Texas State defense. Just understand that it's probably going to be pretty bad.
Just take our word for it.
Yeah, just they have one fun transfer here. They have a 300-pound McNeese defensive tackle who had 16 TFLs last year, Philip Bradford. I hope that goes well. But the defense is probably going to be terrible because it's always terrible at Texas State.
They did not have a player with more than 4 sacks last year.
Yeah, it's a tough deal. Yeah.
Can't have that. Can't have that.
They can't really play defense just about every year. Yeah, for more than a decade, they've had some of the worst defenses in college football pretty much year in, year out. I am not here to predict that that's going to change. But let's talk about the offense because it's fun. Last year, Richard, by my count, there were 12 wideouts in the G6 who cleared 1,000 yards. Exactly 3 of those wideouts are still in college football and on their old team. 2 of them are on Texas State. That's interesting. That tells me something about their talent retention, about how fun it must be to play in GJ Kinney's offense. That's Bo Sparks and Chris Don Jr., the wide receivers, both over $1,000 in yardage last year. And the quarterback, Brad Jackson, over 3,000 yards, is back as well. I think that Texas State is the only program in the country in FBS that has a 3,000-yard quarterback and 2,000-yard receivers back. Now, Miami has that sort of via transfers with Darian Mensah and Cooper Barkate coming from Duke to join Malachi Toney. But in terms of returning continuous production, Texas State is unparalleled right now in the sport. Like, think about all those other G6 wideouts. Danny Scudero went to Colorado. Wyatt Young from Oklahoma State from North Texas went to Oklahoma State. All these guys, they're all gone. Texas State keeps these guys. They keep two of them. At a world where that's just really hard because you cannot hide a G6 wide receiver. You can maybe hide a backup running back or, I don't know, a guard. You can hide some things even with all of the advanced scouting that's going on, all the scouting that's going on at the GM offices of richer programs. But you can't hide 1,000-yard receivers. It's not possible, and they've kept them. So good for Texas State. Says something about their retention and playing in that offense. I mentioned the defense. I'm not talking about it anymore. The Bud is the conference fit. They kind of batted their eyelashes for a while or like put out the mating call, as a bird would do, to the Pac-12 for a long time before they finally got the invite into this league. I remember talking about it with our friend Matt Brown. It was like, is this at the point where it's looking a little tacky so they might not get the invite? Because that kind of thing weirdly matters in some of these realignment politics. They got the invite. It makes no geographic sense, but they think it's better for them than being in the Sun Belt. Would you disagree?
Not really. I mean, it's not like this. I mean, the Sun Belt obviously by default is a better geographic fit, but it's not like
still a flight.
Right. It's a decent, you have a Louisiana in there. And so there's some closer teams, but yeah, it's not like Texas State to Troy makes a ton of sense.
No, it does not make a ton of sense. So this doesn't either, but I think it could be fun. They might have 50 people in the road section, the visiting fan section at some of these games, but they wanted it. They got it. They got the receivers and the quarterback. That's a decent place to start.
There is upside here. They won't stop a nosebleed, but there is upside here.
Colorado State, Richard.
Colorado State, the Jim Mora experience comes to Colorado State. They are sort of doing it again with Northeast head coach who had success, albeit Jim Mora had more success than Steve Adazio, and albeit a different hiring process and different way to get him in there. But they're kind of doing it again where they are taking a not necessarily, in air quotes, geographic fit, which is fine, especially in this portal era. I don't really have a value proposition on that. It's just an observation more than anything else. Colorado State brings in, he's sort of melding some of the players who were there with some of the UConn players. Again, Gordon Thomas took a few with him to TCU as well, so you have that deal. Darrell Robinson at running back, he was with Mora at UConn, then went to Auburn, didn't really get much burn, and we all know how that went last year. Now he's back with him at running back. I think they'll get some production out of him. Man, this was a name when I looked at the thorn here with who might be starting at quarterback for Colorado State. You might recall the disastrous Oklahoma State-Oregon game last year.
Yeah.
Haas Haney is potential Colorado State starter this year, which, as you would say, does not exactly spark joy.
Rebuild. The job has what is still theoretical upside. And you were saying when we did our episode of The Job, Colorado State, or maybe it was just on a coaching carousel episode last year, that people still think that. They haven't bailed on the stuff that we've recurringly mentioned on the show for years, that if you got it aligned right, they could win there. Obviously, going to need to see it, and I don't think it's going to be this year.
I should also say, regarding Colorado State, a big rose, I think, is, and like rose / butter, whatever you want to say, when we talk about the UConn Colorado State meld on the roster, is Omar Diamande is a linebacker who Mora is bringing with him, who I expect to be, he's going to be up there with leaders and tackles in the Pac-12.
It's something. It's something. More than they had to write home about probably under the end of the Jay Norvell tenure. Those fans deserve some reason to be optimistic. Preseason awards and superlatives in this league. The Split Zone Duo preseason Dude of the Year honor. My Doty offensive Dude of the Year, Bo Sparks, the Texas State wideout, who's going to be in that great offense. Defensive Dude of the Year, Jaden Virgin Morgan at Boise, still there, not being poached away by a power program. Because Boise kind of is like a power program in certain respects. I expect big TFL, big sack numbers from him.
Offensive Dude of the Year for me is going to be Lucky Sutton. He's just going to be a bucket for them. He's going to be their significant offensive offensive contributor. So that ends up. And then on defense, I'm going to go with Diamante, who I just referenced, coming over from UConn to Colorado State.
Richard, coach who is not going to be here next year. We check our work from the previous year. It's kind of non-applicable from last year. We obviously had a 2-team league. Both Trent Bray and Jimmy Rogers wound up being out for different reasons. I think Bray was probably more likely to go before the season. But who do you have this year as the likeliest to be out of this league in a year?
I guess I'll go Kinney, up and out.
Yeah, same. If Baylor were to open, for example, he'd be a natural name on that list, at least be in consideration. You could say the same for maybe a couple of other Big 12 jobs if they were to come open. Richard, minority coach of the week and an interesting schematic spot of the year.
Again, this is not a predictor pretender of significant achievement. It's simply just taking a minority coach in a certain schematic spot and saying, that's interesting. I've taken Jamarcus Shep. I think that you're moving into a different league. You've got what kind of guy takes this job? And if they weren't going to get Brent Fegan from Montana, then you go and you take a young guy who wants Montana to be there, has a little bit of bona fides, having been there before, but just wants a shot. And all right. And I think he is going to take some interesting shots player eval wise. He's going to do the bounce back thing. I think he's more apt to do the bounce back thing as far as getting talent in the door. So we'll see how it works out for the Beavers.
Low-key game of the year in this conference. I think a great one is Texas State at San Diego State in week 5. Possible top 20-ish offense against a possible top 20, 30-ish defense. It certainly was last year. We'll see what the regression looks like. If San Diego State is in a certain shape, could be one of the better G6 games, could be one of the better games, period, of the college football season. It'll be at that nice new stadium in San Diego.
I'm taking the combined Boise State, Oregon State, and Boise State, Washington State game. One is in October. The other one is in late November. I just think that it is just going to be an interesting measuring stick. How do you, as Oregon State and Washington State, measure up against the new class of the league?
We'll find out soon enough. Richard, that's the Pac-12 on the front end. That's the Independence Split Zone Duo conference preview season rolls on. Thank you, our listeners, for being with us. We'll see you soon.